Welcome to Community Connections, brought to you by Synapsity, featuring conversations, stories, and interviews with Ottawa's leading changemakers. Enjoy this episode. Today on Community Connections, we feature the successful councilor for the Knoxdale-Merivale ward in Ottawa, Sean Devine. Enjoy this episode. So welcome everybody to another episode of Community Connections brought to you by Synapsity. And today we are delighted to be joined by the new councillor of the Knoxdale-Merivale ward, Sean Devine. And for the past 7 years, Sean has served on the Trend-Arlington Community Association, including 4 years as president, where he's led infrastructure projects, fought irresponsible development, facilitated public consultations, developed recreational programs, launched tree planting initiatives, and partnered with all levels of government. So that's something we love at Synapsity, all that stuff. He's had a direct hand in his community, becoming more resilient and engaged. For his leadership in organizing the recovery after the 2018 tornado, Sean was recognized as the United Way Community Builder of the Year and with a Mayor's City Builder Award. And for his extensive volunteering experience, Sean has received numerous awards, including Nepean's 150th Anniversary Medal and the Nepean-Carleton Canada 150 Award and the Ward 9 Volunteer of the Year Award. So congrats, Sean, on all that. His professional life has been spent in the creative sector, where he's worked as a writer, festival producer, consultant, and a federal arts funding officer. His plays have been published and produced across North America, and he's managed several nonprofit organizations. In his spare time, Sean coaches t-ball, plays in a cover band with his 2 neighbors, and lives in Trend-Arlington with his wife, their 4 kids, and a dog named Hershey. So welcome, Sean, to Community Connections. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's so funny to hear you list all of those accomplishments, and yet I had to spend 5 minutes figuring out how to make this Zoom call work. So
it's always technical things, right?
Yeah.
All the best of us have always had those. So
Yeah.
Congratulations on your victory.
Thank
You
you.
must be thrilled and looking forward to getting into action. How has the transition period been from campaign to councillor-elect and now to councillor?
It hardly feels like there's a moment in between all those phases. So yeah, like I'm definitely I'm beyond thrilled to be here. This was my 3rd time running for public office. I've run as a federal candidate in 2 elections. I lost both of them. And, I learned a lot from those campaigns, and I learned a lot personally from those losses as well. But my point being, it's been being a public elected official has been something that I've been aiming to have be a part of my life for a long time. So I'm beyond thrilled to be here. I'm humbled. I'm gratified. I'm very excited. How has the transition been? Like I was saying, it doesn't feel like there's a moment in between where you can digest all that's happening. Like I've been going nonstop campaigning officially since May, but unofficially since January. And that was a nonstop race. And literally on October, it was funny, like on October 24th was the election day. That's when I won, and I had a moment to let that settle in. And then I get home at about, just after midnight. So October 25th, I checked my email out of habit, and right away in the email, there was an email from the city clerk alerting me about all of the things that I would have to do immediately. And so that was a very sobering experience of like, okay, it begins. And that even though I wasn't to take office until 2.5 weeks after the election, the onus of responsibility was already certainly settling in. And then, like all of my colleagues, I was embroiled in what we call counselor school from like 2 days, like the morning after we started. Like I came in signing oaths of office right away. And that counselor school, while that was happening, where we were all taking various courses and briefings on any number of things, we were also trying to put the pieces of our lives back together again after a 4-month campaign. We're like, oh yes, I should walk the dog now. But while that was happening, we, myself included, were all quite busy trying to find staff for our offices and get the offices themselves set up, while at the same time, we were already being asked by residents who aren't aware of the transition, can you fix this pothole? Can you solve climate change tomorrow? And then at the tail end of that, 2 days ago, we have, our official swearing in, where now we are the councillor. And that's an overwhelming experience, that ceremony, which was really beautiful. That's overwhelming, but you don't even get a moment to pause and take that in, because right away we're dealing with all of the work that we have to do, while at the same time, and I know you're going to get to this in your interview, we as councillors and as a governing body are trying to wrap our brains and deal with the ramifications and the consequences of all of these laws and all these bills that the provincial government has imposed on us. So all that to say, it's been a non-stop, it's not even a roller coaster because it's not ups and downs. It feels like it's a non-stop marathon that you have to run at sprint speed. So, but it's been good.
Wow, yeah, no, thanks so much. That's a great insight to the transition, and wow, that they didn't even give you a day to kind of get you rolling on those oaths. And thanks so much for still taking our email and sitting down with us and fitting us in. I know it's a difficult time, but we really appreciate it, and it's great to have you connected to the Synapsity audience as well.
Well, I mean, you don't have to thank me, because I like what I like. I'm not just doing this for your sake. I'm doing this for my sake and for my goals and my objectives. Like part of one reason that I'm here is I still believe a lot in the power of elected office and in the power of constituents to engage with elected officials. And if one of the things that Synapsity does is try to promote greater engagement in our political processes, that makes me very happy, and it makes our city better. So I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. We have some exciting plans for 2023 and beyond. So I know you're one of 10 brand new councillors and 11 new councillors for this term. And we're also getting a new mayor, or we've got one now. So how do you feel you'll be able to work with the new councillors and the new mayor?
Well, everything so far, everything is fantastic. I am one of hundreds of thousands of my fellow Ottawa citizens who are urgently looking for a more collaborative, less divisive city council. I heard that at the doors, as much as I heard any other issue. I was, excuse me, very pleased to hear from Mayor Sutcliffe that was close to his heart as well. And coming in with 11 new councillors, I can only surmise that all of the 11 councillors want to be part of a mechanism that does work well together. Like, who would want to come in and want to be obstructionist? Nobody would want to do that. And then among the returning councillors, many of whom voiced their frustration with the kind of divisive nature and counterproductive nature of the previous term of council, many of them as well are looking forward to a more collaborative relationship. And so my answer is, I think it's been going well so far. And one thing that I like to think about how this new council is going to work, when we are all talking about wanting to be more collaborative and to work collectively towards common goals, or so, that doesn't mean, forgive me, that doesn't mean that we have to get along. That doesn't mean that we have to agree on everything. Like one of my good friends, and who's working on my team, on my staff, likes to say, politics is the art of managing difference, and not being obstructionist to the presence of difference. And so one of my goals is going to be trying to use whatever skills and capacities I have to go about how do we manage our difference in a way that is still constructive, that we still have good relationships as we do that. And I think I have a lot of like-minded colleagues around the table that want to go about it in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things we focus on at Synapsity is sort of creating dialogue rather than debate.
Yeah.
And, you know, dialogue is where we're sort of talking together rather than at each other. I mean, debate is great. You probably had a fair share of those. But, you know, sort of through dialogue, we can hopefully, you know, change and also, you know, broaden our perspectives as well. So we're hearing a lot about the strong mayor powers, and you alluded a little bit to the government of Ontario and the new law that they're bringing in, which will allow the mayor to pass a bylaw with support of just 1/3 of council, which is a little bit scary. Mayor Sutcliffe has vowed not to use these powers. How do you feel about these new powers and Mayor Sutcliffe's vow not to use them?
Well, I very much, how do I feel about them? Find me one councillor who's happy about it. None of us are happy about it. I'm. This is all coming really quickly, and I'm trying to rather than respond to all of it emotionally, which is hard not to. I'm trying to look at it pragmatically in terms of what can I do to either help prevent these changes from happening, or if that's impossible, what can I do to try to find ways that good outcomes can come from that? So I'm trying to be pragmatic, but at the same time, it's hard not to be emotional because, like I was saying earlier, I really do genuinely believe in and love good politics. And what's happening here is the antithesis of that. This is, even though the Ford government is doing this under the guise of emergencies, that feels like the wool is being pulled over our eyes, and there are far more insidious motives behind all of this, in my opinion. I know that here, and it's also ridiculously unfair and anti-democratic that this is all being done within days of every municipality in Ontario having new councils, because this is the time when we are at our most disorganized and less cohesive, and that's completely tactical. It's also it's mean-spirited, because the byproduct of all of these laws is to remove power from municipalities and from councillors. And so you have people like myself who want to be powers for good, and we're having those powers stripped away from us. So we're being neutered in a way, and at a time when, like, these should be among the proudest moments of our lives. To be sitting here in this chair with the great privilege of being able to talk to you as an elected official, while in the back of my head, I know that I have just had, and my constituents have had, a lot of power cut away from us with a pen without any consultation. So we're all freaking pissed off, Nick. And how do I feel about the mayor's promise to not use these powers? I'm grateful that he has said that. And I trust and believe in him when he says that. But at the same time, I know that the mayor, just like all of us, are human. And it's really hard for human beings, especially those who have to deal with the ebbs and flow of politics. It's really hard to be handed a power and not to see times when you might think it might be necessary to use that power. Any politician would likely experience the same kind of ethical and moral dilemma upon seeing that power presented to them. And I'm not at all saying that our mayor or myself or anybody are sensing the opportunities from that power. I just don't like the fact that that power has been put on a platform in front of us. Nobody's happy about this.
Yeah, it seems pretty wild, and sort of very anti-democratic. You look at some amazing new councillors. We spoke to Ariel, we spoke to Stephanie Wilson, we've spoke to several different candidates, and everyone sort of echoed that they'd been door to door, talked to most of their constituents, which I thought was pretty wild. And now we have folks, 500 kilometers away at Queen's Park making those decisions that should be made at a local level. So bit
Yeah.
frightening, but great to know that you'll be in there fighting for the public good.
Thanks.
So let's talk a little bit about your ward. It's a very interesting ward. It's being termed an outer urban area. It's Knoxdale-Merivale. Wondering what are some of the key issues facing your ward in the years to come?
Well, you'll probably hear this kind of answer from many councillors. Our wards, sorry, my ward, the wards that are in the outer urban area are quite large. And like as compared to Ariel Troster's ward, which has, similar amount of people in a much more dense area, my ward is very large. And what I mean, and the reason I mention that is the ward is as diverse as it is large. And so if I know I have a mental map of the ward, and I know that in different areas of the ward are very unique and specific priorities. But I clearly have been able to identify some common threads that resonated throughout the ward. And these are not dissimilar to common threads that resonate throughout the city of Ottawa, or at least through much of the city of Ottawa within the urban boundary. And these are issues like resolving our broken transit system, and or how do we deal with poor and broken infrastructure. I know that when I look at the needs of my ward through a large lens that will serve the residents of my ward, what I see is my ward is within a city that is projected to grow considerably over the next 30 years. And a lot of that growth, that population growth, is going to happen in Ward 9. And so the approach that we're taking to our term is how do we as elected officials try to manage that growth in a way that is sustainable, that is responsible and effective and just. And so that overall, as that growth happens, we try to maintain, if not augment, the quality of life in our ward. And one thing that's going to be happening in Ward 9, I've lived here a long time, and I've known my predecessor, Councillor Keith Eglai, a long time. And there's going to be a lot of development, a lot of intensification in my ward. My ward has on its edges a lot of important arterial and collector roads, and a lot of development excuse me, is already planned or will soon be planned for those outer edges of my ward, which means there will be a steady infusion of new people living in my ward, which will have great benefits. A denser community can lead to a better quality of life for the people in that community. But if it's not managed well, if that growth is done in a haphazard or poorly planned way, the opposite will happen. So I know that one of my core concerns is to try to do everything in my power, with what powers I have remaining to me, to try to help make sure that that intensification happens well, because my counselor, my predecessor, was telling me that historically, over at least the last 10 years or so, there hasn't been nearly as much development in Ward 9 as there has been in other parts of the city. And so my ward is not used to what is going to be happening to them soon. And I want to help protect them against that while supporting a lot of those objectives.
Yeah, no, great points. We're a city on the grow. We know the next 27 years we're going to add another 500,000 people. So a bit of a wild stat and sort of hard for folks to get their heads around. But great to have a councillor like you kind of fighting and making sure that it's good development and not just pushed through because the developers want it, right? So you talked a little bit there about transportation. I want to dig into that with a couple questions here. You campaigned on the promise of quality and reliable public transit, and I've got a question relating to OC Transpo next. And you also want to bring innovative cycling infrastructure to your ward. So just overall, what are some of your priorities around transportation? And then we'll talk about actual public transit in the next question.
Yeah, like what are my overall goals around transportation? And again, this everything that I want to put forward, I want to make sure. And it's funny that we're having this interview on a day that my team and I are having our first strategic planning session where we are trying to build a cohesive agenda of what we want to do over the next 4 years, and to make sure that that agenda has some common themes and objectives to it. And like I said earlier, one of mine is managing the growth of our city in a way that is sustainable and responsible and effective and just and so forth. And transit and transportation are essential key elements to that. If our city is growing at the rate that you were just mentioning, where there could be as much as 400,000 new people over the next 20, 25 years, when the infrastructure, when the road-based infrastructure of our city is already degrading under the use of the current number of cars, we can only imagine how much that infrastructure will continue to degrade when you add 200,000 more cars to that. Point being, when it comes to transportation, my goal is to try as much as I can to incentivize people away from constant daily use of their automobile, so that we don't overtax our infrastructure, so that we don't overpollute our environment and so forth. But the only way to incentivize that is to provide attractive, effective, affordable, and viable other measures. And so whether those are public transit, or better infrastructure to support cycling, or building communities where everything you need is within walking distance. That's the overall goal. I know I'm answering your larger question. You probably had a follow-up question.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about OC Transpo, but also wanted to echo you about the cycling infrastructure. I'm often up on the experimental farm where it connects to the Pinecrest Trail, and that is a real tough one if you don't know where it connects. And it's an amazing bike ride because you can go all the way up the top of the city, but if you don't know that it connects and you have to go through the construction where the LRT is coming, and then you can pop on that trail and it takes you down to Britannia. But if you don't know it and it's not very well signed, then you're kind of end up cycling in circles, right? So even just bolstering some of those pathways and putting signage between the different networks would probably help a lot too.
And luckily, I like to rely, like I have councillor colleagues, and I have 3 paid staff, and I have an entire bureaucracy at the City of Ottawa that can help me and advise me. But I also have a community full of really smart, really passionate, skilled, experienced people. And I will frequently rely on their expertise on any number of matters. And it just so happens that one of Ottawa's, I'm going to give a shout out here, one of Ottawa's best known and most savvy bike advocates, Hans Moore, on Twitter, he's Hans on the Bike. He lives in Ward 9, and he will regularly be consulted by me when it comes to trying to get ideas for what can we do to, as you were saying, enable and support better cycling. And if one of those ways is to make it clearer where the paths are and how to access them and how to connect yourself from one area to the next, then by God, let's do it. Because we do that with road signage. We have all kinds of infrastructure and information to help make it easier for you to drive around the city. Let's do the same thing for other modes of transportation.
Yeah, no, I know Hans has done some great work over at
Yeah,
Bike Ottawa there,
yeah.
and yeah, so I know my bike's away for a few months for the winter, but it'll be back out in the spring, and I'll hopefully see you on the paths. So, one more transportation question, a bit of a hot topic. Let's talk about OC Transpo and public transit. Many of your fellow candidates were calling for a complete overhaul of the system, an official review of OC Transpo. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on our public transit system? Do you support us doing a complete overhaul and review of OC Transpo?
Well, I mean, I don't fully know what a complete overhaul would mean. Um, I mean, everybody. I would have to assume that everybody, including the senior leadership at OC Transpo themselves, will readily admit that there are gaps and failings at OC Transpo. It does not feel that we are much further along in coming up with trustworthy and reliable solutions to any number of our transit issues, whether it be LRT and LRT planning and reliability, or our busing. So again, I don't know what a full overhaul would mean, but what I do know is, and I would support this, it does feel, and I heard this from residents a lot, that there are some fundamental issues pertaining to bus transit, one being that there must clearly be a lack of buses and or bus operators, because many of our bus routes either have perhaps one or two buses doing that route per day, which is not very much, or the buses are frequently, if not always, late or just don't show up. And both of those point to a lack of resources, I would assume. And the other issue that came up a lot is that for many residents, it does not feel like the bus routes as they are currently laid out are designed to meet their current needs. So much of our transit is oriented towards getting people to and from their homes in the suburbs to downtown. That's what so much of our transit has historically been. And it doesn't feel, and I'm not, again, we're all human. We are still coming out of the throes of a pandemic, which shifted every aspect about our social life, including when do we leave our homes and where do we go when we leave our homes, and how do we get to where we go when we leave our homes. We don't yet know whether or not there will be a full-scale return of workers to the downtown core. We can surmise quite reasonably that there will not be such a return. And if that is the case, and if people still, with the same amount of frequency, need to get out of their homes and go places, then we just need to reroute and redirect where those buses go so that they can still, people in their shifting ways of how they move about and why they move about and where they go, they still have active transportation options to get there. Because if we're no longer commuting daily on a bus, but we still want to commute weekly to go grocery shopping or to go visit somebody 10 kilometers away, or to just go on any other number of reasons, we're not yet at the place where we've figured out how to reroute all of those resources. My point being, I love saying my point being, because I eventually get to a point sometime, is that I would like to support, and this is not going to be an easy thing to do, but an audit or an assessment of what are the changing transit needs and how do we modify our resources to serve those needs. That's an effective use of public resources.
Yeah, absolutely. There must be metrics as to who's taking what. We all see the empty buses go by. I've got one that goes down my street. It's great, but maybe take that away and put, one every 5 minutes going down Fisher. If I have to walk 5 minutes, I'm okay as long as I know I've
Like
got a bus coming.
I agree with you. I love the fact, many people love the fact that, oh, look, a bus comes down this street every half hour. Isn't that nice? Isn't that great? But if that bus is empty 3/4 of the time, what you're seeing go by every 30 minutes, in one way, you're seeing accessibility and an opportunity for somebody to use it. But look at it through another lens and you're seeing money just going down the drain. And we have to look at all of these things from two lenses, being responsible with our public funds and making sure that we continue to provide services to people when and where they are needed. But there's going to be a lot of modifying over the next little while.
Yeah, no, good point. So let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about climate. We know that 2030 is fast approaching and the city has some aggressive targets around emissions. What would you like to see the city doing in relation to climate change? And what are some of the issues maybe facing your ward in particular around climate change?
Um, and again, this is where it's really, really sad and angering and frustrating to be sitting in this chair with all that I had hoped to do and want to do in comparison to what the province is shackling me with. But one of the greatest things that people can do, that governments can do to diminish climate change and the impacts of climate change is to diminish urban sprawl and the vehicle reliance that comes with urban sprawl. When you build further and further out into the suburbs, and when the destination of most of those suburbanites is still, if it is still, working downtown, you are basically forcing people to drive more. And by building in that urban sprawl, you are cutting down farmland or forest, which we need for so many reasons, and you're putting up climate costly housing and then making people buy a car. So that is a big concern of mine. As for ward specific issues when it comes to climate change, so the city of Ottawa has undergone several natural disasters over the past 5 years. There was a devastating flood in 2017. There was a tornado which ripped right through my street in 2018, another flood in 2019, and then this derecho in 2022. And so we can reasonably look at this as a pattern of climate-related disasters, and it then behooves us to wonder if we should be doing something about that. And so when it comes to climate change, there's things that you can do to prevent the further escalation of it. And then there's the responsible things that you need to do to try to prepare against the damage that comes from it. And so in my ward, I will, because I forgot to mention that. So like I said, the tornado was certainly in my ward, and the May 2022 derecho, while it affected the entire city, it affected Ward 9 worse than any other ward for whatever reason. But Ward 9 is clearly in the path of wind-related incidents. And so one of my goals is to do what I can to mitigate against that damage through any number of emergency preparedness objectives. I won't get into the details because that's too much, but that's certainly something I'm going to be focusing on in Ward 9.
Yeah, no, that's great. You know, more resilience, folks that are able to kind of go off grid. People are powering their homes with their electric vehicles now. So there's lots of options. I want to talk a little bit about trees because we know that the storm kind of, the devastating storm had a huge impact. Are there some things you're looking at around the tree canopy in your ward?
Absolutely. I love trees. Like one of the best things, I love to read about urban planning, but the planting of trees it should be the most no-brainer policy initiative for any number of reasons. The planting of trees is a clear win when it comes to diminishing the impacts of climate change. The planting of trees and the restoration of our urban canopy also just makes for better, happier quality of living. There's this great urban planning book I'm reading that talks about a word, I think the word is called biophilia, B-I-O-P-H-I-L-A, and it talks about how the presence of greenery just makes for a happier life. One of my goals as a politician is to try, it sounds trite, but it's not. I just want to make people's lives better and make them happier. Why not have that as a goal in so many ways? And so, because of my experience in my ward from the tornado, I did over the past 4 years get involved in many different tree planting initiatives. I will certainly be trying to resuscitate those partnerships and those initiatives on a wider scale. And one that I'd love to plug, if I could here, the City of Ottawa has a forestry department. And within that forestry department, there's a program called Trees in Trust. And this only applies if you're a homeowner on a parcel of land where there is space to plant a tree. But basically, Trees in Trust, most homeowners know that the first 10 feet of their property from the street in, that's not their property, that's city easement land. And the Trees in Trust program basically allows homeowners to have a city tree planted at no additional cost to the residents on that land. And I just had this done in my at my house 2 days ago. And these are not little mini shrubs. These are like 10-foot tall, 3-year-old saplings, trees already growing. And the city takes care of it. And the reason it's called the Trees in Trust program is the city will plant it and leave it with you as the owner. They are trusting you to take care of the tree for the first 3 years by watering it and so forth. So that's a lot of people. I put out a tweet this week about my tree being delivered. And I mentioned the Trees in Trust program. That tweet got 500 likes. I was shocked because I think there's a lot of desire for restoring our urban canopy. And I think a lot of people aren't aware of this Trees in Trust program. And I'm definitely going to be making that one of my tasks to try to disseminate information about that program far and wide, maybe even get its budget increased.
Yeah, no, that's a great program. Thanks for mentioning that. We'll definitely promote that at Synapsity, and definitely echo you about, trees. One of my favorite places in the city is the Arboretum. Whenever I go there, it's just, increases my mood, makes me feel better. So absolutely agree with you there. So let's dive into another issue that I'm sure you and your team were chatting about earlier today, and that's housing. It was another major issue during the election. We're seeing changes from all levels of government to encourage the building of more housing and housing units, yet the wait list for affordable housing is still over 10 years. So what are your thoughts on how the city can help solve the affordable housing crisis?
Well, like a lot of my colleagues, I don't believe that the solution is only through increasing supply, because the market will demonstrate that just because there's a whole lot of supply, if the demand for that housing is strong enough, then the cost will just keep on going up. That said, we don't just have an affordable housing crisis, we have a housing crisis as a whole. So I am somewhat grateful that the apparent objective of all of these crazy bills is to build more housing. But when it comes to affordable housing, and housing that is just simply more affordable, I haven't fully grasped it, but I understand one of the implications of Bill 23 is to decrease the minimum percentage of inclusionary zoning, therefore affordable housing required within new developments. And that's just a punch in the gut. I don't know why, when we're trying to set standards, higher minimum percentages for inclusionary zoning and affordable housing, I just don't understand the principle or the spirit behind trying to lower that. But like when I think about my ward, there are plans in place for large, like 29-story towers that when I look at that kind of project, I know that those units are not going to be marketed to families who just have no other, when it comes to affordable housing, we have people that are looking for, affordable housing, i.e. housing that they can afford, that is not market value. But then we also have families who right now are completely priced out of the market. And although they have jobs that should allow them to buy a house in this city, they just simply cannot. And so we have to provide options for those kinds of customers to be able to buy that. And when I look at some of, and this is what I was saying, at some of the projects that are being developed in my neighborhood, they are going to be marketed to luxury clientele that can afford to pay for the 27th, 28th, 29th floor of a tower. And I'm looking to see if I can help advance other kinds of planning projects, i.e. your missing middle 6 to 9 story apartment complexes where there might be 1-bedroom units, but also 3-bedroom units or 4-bedroom units. So that is just one thing among many that councillors, I hope, are going to be advancing so that different kinds of people have more options available to them.
Yeah, no, good points. We were at the Haven in Barrhaven a few weeks back doing a focus group, and I was just blown away by the community. How nice it was, how sort of everyone was very welcoming. So it'd be great to see more of that throughout the city as well. So we know that housing, transportation, climate, all of these come with large financial costs. I'm wondering if just a few words around the city budget, and if you've kind of started to wrap your head around how our budget should work.
How our budget should work. Well, I mean, I don't yet know how, I don't have all the knowledge yet on how our budget works. One thing I do know about the city's budget, which is an integral component to how that budget works, is that by law, our city budget cannot project a deficit. A city budget has to balance. And the thing that I'm quite apprehensive about in a scenario like that, where a budget must, by law, balance, and yet we are looking at factors beyond our control, including inflation, or including the fact that, according to Bill 23, we can no longer collect the kinds of development charges that count as a significant amount of revenues in a budget that must balance. When you have the fact that beyond our control, we're losing revenues, and beyond our control, inflation is going to make costs go up. When that budget must by law balance, there's only two things you can do. You can either slash expenses. Well, I'm sure there's more than just two things you can do, but typically you either cut expenses or you increase revenues, both of which lead to a lot of financial and political consternation. So I'll answer your question by saying, at this moment in time, with all of those requirements that the budget balance and those items beyond my control, which will force to either a forced increase of revenues or a forced decrease in expenses, I'm apprehensive because both of those directions are gonna lead to pain. I know that when I entered this process, I was really eager to talk about budgeting because I still do believe, that budgets are the demonstration of what your values are. And I was eager to be involved in a process where we work with our communities on trying to identify what are our city's values and how should those values be reflected in our budget. And now, rather than looking at our budgeting process with that lens, I'm being forced to look at it through a lens of apprehension. And it's scary when you look at a budget process with apprehension as opposed to courage and optimism, because when you look at a budget with apprehension, that's when being, I don't want to say being too careful, but being too thrifty may happen. And when you look at budgets with apprehension and you take the understandably conservative approach to how to deal with that apprehension, scary things can happen.
Yeah, it's a bit like living in fear versus sort of living and enjoying the moment, right? You can't always be fearful that all these things are going to be taken away from you. I mean, it could happen, but you have to still live and get out there and enjoy life a little bit. So let's,
I'm definitely being doomy and gloomy. Like a lot of people are like, the budget, I just want to go out and have dinner tonight. And that's great. So do I.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We know you'll be in there fighting for some important things, and one of them is arts and culture. And we were joking before the interview that you'll be the counselor that hopefully supports arts and culture the most. I know it's a topic that it's near and dear to your heart, having worked in the sector for a large part of your career. Ottawa is still labeled as a boring city, right? We had that Uber report recently, and we generally do see an exodus of creative talent to bigger cities like Montreal and Toronto. What do you think that we need to do to help foster the arts and creative culture in Ottawa?
Well, it's funny to talk about arts right after talking about apprehensive budgeting, because it always reminds me of a quote from Winston Churchill, and I don't quote him very often, but during World War II, when the British Parliament was, worried about their budget because of all of the war costs, and they proposed to slash the arts budget because of its frivolous nature, to which Churchill, and I don't know what he said, I'm paraphrasing, retorted back, well, then what are we fighting for? So all that to say, I am definitely a passionate advocate of the arts, not only because it has been, it's been at the core of my life for, I'm 52. It's been in the core of my life for the past 35, 40 years. But I'm passionate about it, not just because it has defined who I am, but I also fundamentally believe in the role that arts and culture play in making people's lives better. And not just the lives of those who practice it, but those who experience it as well. There's a reason why we here at Council are excited about the fact that next week we all get to go and select art for our office walls from the city's art bank. There's a reason why we're excited about that, because we know it's going to make our lives better. So I'm always going to be an advocate for maintaining, advancing, and augmenting the role that arts play in our lives. As to your question about how do I feel about Ottawa being a boring city, that's your quote, not mine, buddy. And the exodus of Nick Webb said Ottawa's a boring city, not Sean Devine. And it's true. There's reasons why there are exoduses. Is that the plural of exodus or exodi from small cities? Because typically it's in the larger cities where you have that density of population that keeps an arts industry thriving, because it is a very hard industry to thrive in. What am I going to do to help that? Well, one interesting thing about arts and the role that they play in cities is that arts are typically seen as being a downtown thing. And there's good reason for that. But as I don't want to get into the weeds on this, but there are many, many movements that are trying to democratize and decentralize the mechanics of how and where and by whom and for whom art plays a role. And I would be very happy, as much as I'm going to continue doing what I can, especially as we try to revitalize our downtown core and keep people here. Obviously, I'm not saying I want to take away the role of arts in a downtown core. No. I want to go downtown too. But what I want to do is, what can a city do to bring art more out into the suburbs? So where I live in Ward 9, in the suburbs, just like most suburbs, if you were to review the kind of city-funded recreational programming that happens in those areas, you're going to see sport, craft, sport, art, sport, craft. And that's all well and good, but I'd like to not take away the sport, by God, no, but infuse more options. Arts and culture can thrive on a grassy field, just as it can on a dance stage at a downtown theater. I'm going to make that happen, Nick.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It would be nice to use some of those green spaces and really animate those outer parts of the city. I really like that, and I'm glad to hear you're going to be getting some art because I was going to say those walls are looking a little bit bare, but I know it's only
I know.
your second day, so I wasn't going to give you too hard of a time. So, final question for you, Sean. We here at Synapsity, we're all about creating engaged citizens. So, I'm wondering, how do you want your constituents to engage with you over the next 4 years? What are the best ways to reach out to you, and how can they win your support on things they care about?
Um, how can they win my support? Well, there's two ways. One, engage in dialogue with me. So you can't win my support if I don't know what you're trying to get done. So by all means, reach out to me. And the other way to always engage my support is to persuade me with your good idea. Like I like to think that I am the most susceptible person to a good idea. Like nothing gets me more excited more. Nothing gets me more excited more. Nothing gets me more excited than a good idea. So how can people get my support? I am very thrilled. And one reason that I like being in municipal politics, because I ran federally, but I love the fact that in municipal politics, in municipal governance, the elected official will engage in a much, much more direct face-to-face way with constituents. You know, this is not, I'm not your MP from an ivory tower. I'm your city councilor walking the dog on the street that you live on. And so, not that I want you to come up and harass me while I'm walking my dog with a handful of dog poo, but I very much will be, one of the central elements of my term is going to be outreach and engagement. Like we very much want to see engagement with our constituents, first of all, as a two-way dialogue, and second of all, as something that happens not just every 4 years during an election campaign, but happens frequently and in different ways and for different reasons. And so there will be numbers of ways. I mean, people will find out ways to engage with me, and I welcome it.
Absolutely. And, your ward is lucky to have you. I really want to thank you for joining us today, Sean. I really appreciate you joining us on the Community Connections podcast. Are there any last words you'd like to leave the Synapsity audience with?
That don't have that won't get me in trouble for a comment on Doug Ford? Nope.
There you go. Well, thanks so much, Sean Devine. We really appreciate it. We'll be watching you with great interest, and we'll hopefully get you to engage in some of our activities as we continue on in Synapsity.
By all means. Thanks for having me, and please invite me in the future.
Thank you for watching Community Connections, brought to you by Synapsity. Be sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Until next time, stay connected.